We have a study session for the brownfields, but first off, can we have everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call. Ms. Clerk, please.
Certainly. Councilpersons Bear?
Here.
Dupre? Not here. Ross? Here. Salcido?
Here.
Soar?
Here.
Tobin?
Here.
And Mayor Higgins is absent.
With that, James, you want to introduce our guest for the brownfields?
Yeah, sure. So we're here tonight to talk about brownfields. When we had our public hearing for the proposed Sears development, I think it was clear we needed more information on the entire brownfield process and brownfields as a whole, right? So kicking around who we might be able to invite. We brought in John Diadana from the executive director of the Downriver Brownfield Coalition Program. So without further ado,
Okay.
I will kick it right over to John.
I was told this is Brownfields 101, so ask any questions as we go along, okay? Because some of this stuff gets a little complex and intertwined. So I'm with the Downriver Community Conference. I'm the Brownfield Program Manager. I've been there a little over, about 2.5 years, but I was a consultant for DCC back since 2007. And I've been doing the Brownfields for a long time, since 1995, when the whole program was the inception of the program. So I don't have Ann Jameson with me here. Sometimes she speaks with me. So this just says what I'm doing with the Brownfield program. I've been a consultant for many years. Semi-retired, then started in with the DCC. They needed some help, so I decided I would help them out. So we're going to talk just briefly about the DCC so you know how we fit into things, the available brownfield assessment and cleanup funding opportunities, eligible sites and activities, the process for getting money. When I say getting money, DCC has money, and I'll explain how that falls into things too, and then other brownfield and economic incentives. There are quite a few possibilities on projects, so I think the watchword is don't close any doors. You got a lot of opportunities on these sites. Jim Perry, many of you probably know, he's executive director of Downriver Community Conference. He's the head honcho. So if you hear any sports analogies, I'm sorry, Jim he's all about sports analogies, so he probably rubbed off on me a little bit. So DCC's been around since 1977, and we do a lot of different things there: employment services, job training, job placement, small business assistance. We're doing business development, which includes the small business assistance and brownfield redevelopment. They have transportation programs, weatherization programs, and they do downriver mutual aid with fire and police. And these are the member communities, and you'll see down on the first column there, Lincoln Park is one of the member communities. Carl Malish and I have been working together now for a couple years. And Carl has utilized my services a couple times to come over here and look at some of your properties, and he's been attending our monthly brownfield meetings. So this is kind of the whole process. I try to keep these things encapsulated as briefly and as simply as possible. So we're talking about a community planning process that moves. We're talking about contaminated sites mainly, okay? You plan what you want to do with a site, you do site assessments, you do cleanup, and then you redevelop the property so it gets back on the tax rolls. And intermingled with all of this on the Brownfield program is community outreach. There's a lot of community outreach involved. And generally these projects need gap financing, so you'll see I've listed several things up on the top there: EPA Site Assessment Grant, EAGLE Site Assessment Grant. EAGLE is the Michigan Energy, Great Lakes and Environment Department, and you know who EPA is. And they have cleanup grants, revolving loan fund grants, and you can also use tax increment financing, which I'm sure all of you have been hearing about on the site you're looking at, and you can even float bonds to help pay for things up front and then get repaid over time. So DCC has both an assessment grant from EPA and a revolving loan fund grant, and these are just the parameters of what you can get for these different programs. So if the city has a property, you could come to us and say, we'd like to assess that property, and you could get 100% of assessment costs up to $30,000 from DCC through their EPA grants. For a developer, we ask that the developer pay for 50% of those costs, so they get a maximum of up to $15,000, and we also offer to pay up their Phase 1 environmental site assessment of 100% up to $5,000, so that it starts to take a little bit of the risk away from the developer. They don't know if they want the property, they're not sure. This kind of gets them started, gets them in the program. Then we have a revolving loan fund, which is mainly for cleanup of sites. So the first one was assessments, this is cleanup. We give out either loans and grants up to $500,000. The developer, for a sub-grant where we're actually giving money out, we can go up to $500,000. And if you have a developer or a community property, we can loan up to any amount. We have just received a $3 million grant from EPA. If there was a great project, we could loan all $3 million to one project. So we have those at our disposal. So now that was just kind of the backdrop so you know where we're kind of coming from DCC point of view. So this is the definition of a brownfield from EPA. It's a brownfield site means real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. So it really focuses on contamination itself. EPA's definition is quite a bit narrower than Michigan's, and when I get to Michigan's, you'll see Michigan has a great program. It really has one of the best brownfield programs in the nation, and it's because it's expanded what a brownfield site can be. So from EPA's perspective, a brownfield site can be as small as a gas station, a quarter-acre gas station, or it could be large as several hundred acres of industrial property. And I'm just going to show you a few pictures of different types of brownfields. They come in all sizes and shapes, all names and shapes. They can be pretty nasty sites. As you can see there, this is a site in Flint that had General Motors facilities on they had 7 factories sitting on these properties here. It's called Chevy in the Hole, downtown Flint. This is what it looked like with all the buildings that have been demolished. That same picture that I just showed you, the plan view. So, what are the obstacles to redevelopment of brownfield properties? You got environmental contamination, you got to worry about liability, the cost of cleanup, financing those costs, market conditions, could you even sell the property? Is it in a place where people are interested? You've got community issues, just stigma, people just don't want things built on certain sites like this, so those are all obstacles. But you also have advantages on these sites. You can retain or create new jobs. You can return abandoned properties to the tax base. You can utilize existing infrastructure, and you can clean up environmental contamination. You can also increase neighborhood economic vitality, improve the appearance and pride of the surrounding community. And one of the big ones more now with climate change and resiliency going on is discourage urban sprawl and loss of green space. So Michigan has, like I said, a much broader view of what brownfields are, and it can be more than just contaminated. They could be functionally obsolete. A functionally obsolete property would be something like when the Pontiac Silverdome ceased to be a football stadium anymore and they tore it down. It was functionally obsolete as a football stadium or as any venue for anything else. It could be blighted property. A blighted property could be a property where the roof is caving in. It's unsafe for people to be around. Historical properties designated by the historical societies in Michigan, those are automatically considered a brownfield site. You could have a property owned by a land bank, whether it's clean or dirty, it becomes a brownfield site. And you can have adjacent and contiguous properties also as brownfield properties. So you can see it's pretty broad. Yeah, everybody kind of get the gist of that broadness there for Michigan. So the basis of Michigan's brownfield program is Public Act 381, Brownfield Redevelopment Financing Act. That's really what guides the whole program through the process. Whoops, sorry. And Also Michigan's Natural Resources Environmental Protection Act, Parts 201 and 213, which tells you how clean a property needs to be if you're going to reuse a property. It's either Part 213 is for underground storage tank leaks, and Part 201 is any other type of release other than an underground storage tank. Those are the three basic parts to the Brownfield program. So the idea with the Brownfield program is to really level the playing field for developers. You're trying to help them get rid of the risk, level the playing field so they would choose a Brownfield site as opposed to a Greenfield site. That's really what we're trying to do, so that some of the encumbrances on a dirty site go away, so that now the developer says, oh, they're just about equal, and I'd rather be in the city or in the downtown area than I would be out on a farmland or something on the outskirts of town. So the tools and incentives are to give liability protection to a developer because they didn't cause the contamination. You want to give them reasonable cleanup requirements and costs, which means you don't have to clean up every molecule of contamination from a site. You just have to utilize that property so that it's safe for the people that are going to use it. So you can put a parking lot over some contamination, like if you had lead in soil, you could pave over it so it's encapsulated. You don't have to take all that dirt off site, which sometimes can be very costly. If you're removing, thousands of cubic yards of soil and have to move it from, which essentially is a landfill on a brownfield, to a landfill somewhere else. You're paying for that. And then there are also financial incentives for developers as you go through the process. So the Brownfield Redevelopment Financing Act allows you to establish a brownfield program in your community that allows tax capture for eligible properties. It determines how taxes can be used on eligible properties and eligible activities. And it provides a framework for Act 381 work plans, which drives how a cleanup has to happen on a site. The Act 381 work plan is what Eagle would review and say, this is sufficient to clean up the site, to utilize it as you want to use it for. Slow me down if I'm going too fast, too. I mean, sometimes I get rolling on these things. So these are just more, this is a little more definition of the different types of sites that are considered brownfields under Public Act 381. I think a couple of interesting things, like under blighted, that property held by a land bank qualifies as a blighted property. So if the property goes to a land bank, when the property's in a land bank, there's zero taxes, so when it becomes to tax increment financing, that can be an advantage. And I explained kind of what the functionally obsolete and historic properties are, so I won't spend a lot of time there. So, tax increment financing. The good thing about tax increment financing is it doesn't depend on a grant or a loan. So this program, whether there were grants and loans from EPA or the state of Michigan for cleanup, you don't have to have them. The program runs on taxes that a developer would pay and then gets repaid over time. So that's an advantage for this program. You don't always have to be connected into grants and loans, which sometimes the government's not giving those out, okay, and sometimes they're at a premium. You control the tax increment financing provisions on how you want to help a developer. You can give everything a developer wants in their brownfield plan. You can give them half of what they want. You can give them as little as you want. You can tell them to go fly a kite. There's lots of things you can do, but it's in your hands. The brownfield plan determines what they will get. So I've had communities where a factory goes under. It's the only big property in the community. They desperately need a replacement because maybe it's the only industry in town. So you might give that developer that's interested in that property a little more incentive than you would somebody that maybe wants a property in the prime spot in your town that everybody wants. So it's up to you. You get to decide. So it uses new incremental taxes generated by the project. It does not take away taxes. It just abates taxes for a period of time until the developer is made whole, and then the taxes that are generated go on in perpetuity. So if you if that property stays vacant for 20 years, you're never going to get taxes from that property. So the fact that you're now giving the developer those taxes for a period of time, some people think, well, now we're not getting the money. Well, you're not getting the money anyway because the site's not getting redeveloped. So it's kind of a way of just holding the taxes in abatement for a period of time. The pre-development taxes remain with the taxing unit, so whatever is being taxed on the property now does not go away. That's still there. You still get those taxes that are being on the property now. It reimburses the developer for eligible activities and only eligible activities, and I'll go over what some of those things are. And the property owner and or tenants pay 100% of the tax bill every year, but then they receive a check back utilizing the new tax revenues. So if a developer puts in $1 million of cleanup on a property and the taxes are $100,000, they would pay 10 years of $100,000 and get that $100,000 back for 10 years. Okay, and then when they're made whole, that's the end of what they get. And they only get those taxes back if this project is completed. It's not like it's a risk to the community. The project has to be completed before they get taxes back. So this is just a little diagram of what tax increment financing is. On the left, you have base taxes on a property. They're pretty low because the property is underutilized. And then you put a new development on the property, it adds the green part is the TIF capture. That's the incremental capture of taxes above and beyond what you're already getting on the property. And that's what the taxes will go up as determined by your assessor on a property. And then that developer gets made whole year after year or get taxes back year after year until they're made whole. And then you go on, and then the base taxes then will go up to include the TIF capture taxes as well. It's another view of how this works. So if you look on the bottom, we've got years on the bottom, and the darker brown on the bottom is your base taxes. That's what you're getting paid now, and they tend to go up and down a little bit every year. And then the project reimbursement TIF capture is that $1 million in that example I was giving. The project reimbursement year after year to the developer until they're made whole. And then when the developer's made whole, you have the option to take those taxes in for another 5 years and put them in a separate fund called the Local Site Remediation Revolving Fund to use on other brownfield sites that you want to use. Let's say you own a property, a large property, and you want to get it assessed. You want to use assessment dollars to look at that site. You can take those taxes from the local revolving loan fund that you captured and use it on another site. So it's kind of a little fund that you can use to keep the program going along. And a lot of communities have taken advantage of this. Traverse City has used this a lot, Washtenaw County, Detroit. They all have these funds that they can, when a property comes available that they want to buy or purchase, they can go in and they can do the assessment costs and even do some cleanup activity. And with or without the Local Site Remediation Revolving Fund capture, the full return of the tax rolls then, if you don't do the Local Site Remediation Revolving Fund capture, that left or that right box, the full return to tax rolls would move to the left. So you don't have to do that. Generally, what I tell people is to have everybody put it in their brownfield plan, and then when you get to that point, you don't have to take that money. You don't have to put it in a fund. You can just say, we paid the developer back, we don't have any projects coming up on the horizon, so we're just not going to capture any more taxes, and the project is over. And then you're at full tax rolls. Any questions so far? I know I'm going pretty fast, and I'll slow down. Go ahead.
In that chart, it looked like you had 15 years of regular capture when you gave a 10-year...
You actually can go up to 30 years to do that. I used to have a different year down there, but it started at 2000, but I've updated it so that it shows more.
How many years would you say does a community usually take to complete a brownfield project?
Well, to get for the
Which I
full,
know it
for the
depends
full
on the size of the
payback.
project,
Yeah, for the
yeah.
full payback, I mean, a really great project would probably get a payback in like 7 or 8 years. Okay, if that was like a community-owned site that has no taxes on it now, and then somebody puts something great on it and it jumps up, and now it's got all these taxes coming in, that's usually like a 7 or 8, sometimes even shorter than that. Usually when a project has like a 30-year payback, I suggest the community really think if that's a good project for you. Is that really doing what you want it to do? Are your taxes going up enough that you're really getting the bang for the buck? But I would say most of them fall between 10 and 25 years, if I had to use it. And you can put a cap on it yourself. You can look at the whole scene and say, we're only going to pay 12 years, no matter what the reimbursement is. Some communities have done that, where they say, they look at the Brownfield plan and it looks like the capture is like 25 years, and they said, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to approve 12 years. And whatever that amount is at 12 years that they've captured, that's what the developer gets.
And that puts the burden on the developer to accept those terms.
Yes, yes. That's where you negotiate and, so it really can be just about anything you want. Sometimes they'll go 50-50. You just say, we're gonna give you half of what you're asking for. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to do it, but it's really your decision on how you want to work with the developer.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
When we're talking about this, it's just tax money, but are we looking at interest also?
It can be.
It can be.
That's your choice. The developer can come in and say, I'd like to include interest on this because this project is going to take 5 years and it's going, my interest costs of building materials and everything are going up. You have the ability to put interest in there. You can tell the developer, no, we're not going to pay for interest, but you
Okay.
can include interest, yes.
I have another question.
Sure.
Because you talked about protecting the developer.
Mm-hmm.
Who protects us?
Well, the development agreement will protect you. So whatever you put in the development agreement, that'll be a legal document that states all the different clauses that that need to be met for that developer to get paid. And again, you don't give any money to a developer until the project is over and the taxes are coming in. It's not like you're putting your neck out. The developer has to put their neck out with an approved brownfield plan and do what they say they're going to do. And if you involve state taxes through either EGLE or MEDC, which I'll get into in a minute, they have to have that 381 work plan that approves exactly what they're going to do, how they're going to clean up the property, and they have to meet those requirements as approved by the state of Michigan. So those are the protection from the environmental side. The protection for the financial side is, one, they complete the project, okay, and two, you have a development agreement that states how you're going to pay them back and, the different ways that you can protect yourself in there, and you would have an attorney obviously work with you to craft that.
Okay.
They can't walk away from it once it's started, correct?
Well, you can put in the development agreement, some clauses that, where they would have to have, could be penalties or something if they walk away, but they're not getting any money from you. I mean, if they went bankrupt, the project just ends and you still got the property there, but hopefully, when you do your due diligence with a developer that comes in, they're going to prove that they're financially viable. They're going to give you financial documents. You're going to see, what they're made of, basically, when you go into the project.
What if they're expecting one thing, like an underground tank, but then they find out that the building is way more, there's more things going on with the building as well? So now it's really increased what they started out to do.
Well, that's kind of up to you, but generally in these projects, they have to do a good job of assessing the site. Sometimes you run into some things that, you can't always know everything when you get into it. And they would have to come back to you and ask for an expanded brownfield plan, or they would have to adjust the eligible cost, and it might take more years of payback, or you might just say you're stuck, or, there, again, that's probably a negotiating area. If you think that they're in good faith going forward with the project and something very unusual happens, you're going to have to step back, both of you are going to have to step back and figure out, a way of getting through the project.
Okay. Thank you.
So, in the 381 eligible activity costs are broken into two groups. One's through Eagle, which is all the contamination part of a brownfield site, and then non-environmental things like that that are the responsibility of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation if they choose to participate in your project. As you develop a brownfield plan, or the developer develops a brownfield plan, they're going to try to get MEDC involved in the project, and those are generally projects that are in downtown areas where MEDC wants to see downtown areas, recover. And so the environmental things like investigation, due care, and cleanup are the responsibility of Eagle, and demolition if it's required to eliminate contamination. So if you know that there's contamination under a building floor, those costs for demolishing that building can be used and approved by Eagle because they have to get to the contamination to get the contamination out. A lot of buildings you don't know if there's contamination underneath, and that's where MEDC is still the prime person because it's considered a non-environmental cost. You're just demolishing the building. MEDC will also do site preparation costs, so if you need to level the property or make it more amenable for the development, that's an MEDC cost. Eligible activity, you can do infrastructure improvements, like if the property needs a new sewer coming to the property or a new water line because there's not sufficient capacity in those existing infrastructure. MEDC can grant those as eligible activities. And like I said, if demolition is not associated with contamination, so if you just have an old building.
Are you aware of the parcel that we're considering? Okay.
Yes, I am, yep. I would say that's probably a property that's got part of the building over some contamination over a garage area. The rest of it's probably, you don't know if it's contaminated, but.
Would they split that up?
Yeah, they can split that up, yeah.
Excuse me, I'm glad Jason brought that up, because I believe this study session was in regards to 2100 Southfield Road. So I don't know if you can be more specific. Does developer want to pay for this Brownfield, or is the city going to pay for it? They already bought it. Are they obligated to clean up the site?
Well, they have to clean it up so it's safe for reuse. So they're not responsible for the contamination. So they could hold on to that property and not do anything. They're not liable to clean it up unless you have an approved brownfield plan. So at some point in time, when they move forward, they're going to have to clean it up to at least the point that it's going to be safe, whatever it's going to be reused for. If it was reused for an industrial building, it doesn't have to be cleaned up as much as it would be for a daycare center.
So in other words, they kind of have the city they have the city in a way, because now they want to develop this land, but now they're going to want some assistance in cleaning up the area, right?
Well, I'm sure they're going to ask for it. They're going to ask for something. I'm sure they've got their pro forma that says how much they need to make the project, economically viable, and they're going to try to utilize as many of the tools in the Brownfield program as possible, which is what all communities are pretty much doing. It's not something unusual.
All right, thank you.
Other questions?
Anyone from the crowd have a question?
Do you have attorneys that you work, I'm the assessor.
Okay.
Do you have attorneys that work with you, or that you have a list of that deal with these?
Yeah, most of the large attorneys, we work with a certain one that handles our DCC obligations, but we've worked with other attorneys. I could give you some names.
Yeah, because, it's patently unfair to ask our city attorney to deal with this.
Sure.
It's far more specialized than theirs.
Yeah, I would agree. So, a little better breakdown of what possible statewide eligible reimbursement expenses include. So this is a mixture of both environmental and I guess this is for the environmental one, sorry. So you can do environmental assessments and brownfield plan preparation under under a brownfield plan for reimbursement. You can do due care compliance, which is a report that basically tells you what you need to do to make the site safe for what the developer wants to reuse it for. You can do additional response activities, which would be removing tanks and things like that underground. You can do lead and asbestos surveys and abatement on properties. You can do demolition, solid waste disposal, industrial cleaning, and UST removal on properties. Interest, you ask about interest. Interest is included. That's an eligible activity. That doesn't mean you have to use it. It's just eligible. You get to choose whether you want to have it in there or not. Tax reimbursement comes from the increased property taxes above existing tax base on the project. So this would be the process that you guys are going through already. You got a brownfield plan that's developed by the developer, and they'll seek probably reimbursement for that brownfield plan as part of their request. It goes to the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority for approval. The authority then either approves it or denies it, or it sends it back for revisions. Once the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority approves it, it goes to City Council or Commission for approval. Then you put together a reimbursement agreement, and that's really where the rubber meets the road. That's where your attorney really sits down and says, this is how things have to happen in order for things to get reimbursed, and how you're going to really work with the developer. And this is not new for attorneys and also for developers and their environmental consultants. These guys, they generally know what they're doing. Then you have to get Act 381 work plan approval from either EGLE and or MEDC if you're going for school tax capture, okay? And I generally suggest somebody to do a 381 work plan even if you're not going for, if you're just going for local taxes, just so they have a blueprint of exactly what they're trying to do on the property. And then you go through reimbursement requests following completion of the project. So every year, they would turn in their invoices, show you what they spent, and the treasurer or assessor's office would reimburse that developer for whatever taxes they put in for that year, and not more. They can't get back more than what they put in. So if they hand you a check for $10,000, the most they can get back is $10,000 for that year.
Now, that's liable to audit also, isn't it?
Yes, sure.
Uh,
Go ahead.
I guess just want to get your general opinion, how, like in your experience, how often do you see brownfield projects go bad? Because I have done work in environmental consulting, and I currently work for Republic Services. And so I see this as a compromise between the environment, government regulations, and the business community to try to help get a net gain for the local community, because the Sears parcel sitting there empty isn't helping anyone out. But there is always an inherent risk. I know we don't pay them until the project, or we don't reimburse them until the project is over.
Right.
And that's like our main safeguard, right?
Right, correct.
But that would obviously be a very bad scenario for us to have to go through with how many years this site has sat vacant. So I was just wondering, are there any red flags to look for from a developer? If they're asking for, do they all ask for the sun and the moon as far as 100% reimbursement?
No, theoretically, they're supposed to ask for the gap that they need to make the project go, okay, theoretically.
Which only they can determine, of course.
Which really they can only, determine. Some of them will ask for everything on every project, and you need to look at their track record to see how they've done on other brownfield sites. I mean, there are some really good brownfield redevelopers, like companies like Ashley Capital. They're building on landfills. I mean, they do a bang-up job, but they know how to do it. I mean, so they've been through it before. This program adds a little bit of time to a developer, so they can't just, move through like they would on a normal development. They got to get approvals. They've got to really do some homework. Really, the biggest challenge is knowing whether their financial package for getting the project done is going to work. It's the finances. okay? The cleanup and all the ins and outs about all of the stuff I'm talking about, that isn't usually what goes bad, okay? If you find more contamination, that doesn't usually close a project down, okay? It's usually the financial structure of the deal. They lose their funding from a bank, or they don't meet the requirements that the bank had. They didn't move fast enough, or do this or do that. That's really what you got to look at, is to make sure that you feel that their financial plan of how they're borrowing money and that sort of thing is, if it looks reasonable. And that's, as any development project, you got to be looking at that. So it's really no different for a brownfield project.
And you say you have a lot of communities that take advantage of the revolving loan as far as putting that additional 5 years for like their next project. Like, how does a community plan out in their scope how many brownfield redevelopments we might have, in the next 5 years, 10 years?
Well, as part of like the assessment grant, we have a DCC. One of our jobs is to identify brownfields and prioritize brownfields down the road. So we work with communities to try and develop that list, and you kind of look at that list, and if they feel like you're going to be active in brownfields, then you probably would want to have that revolving loan fund there in case you need it. And I would suggest, when you get to a certain point, I would have you talk to a couple people that are doing that in their community, so you understand how it works, and how well it works, and the advantages that they have. I mean, when our money, like from DCC, runs out, sometimes the local revolving loan fund is there to take over. Sometimes, like when we work with Washtenaw County, for instance, we have a project, we're paying for half of a phase 2, and the local revolving loan fund's paying for the other half of the phase 2 for the assessment. So there's just little things that can help reduce that upfront risk that maybe lets a developer take a little closer peek at a property, or maybe they would just decide in normal circumstances to go to another site.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
A brownfield does not have to be located in the DDA downtown area, right?
No.
It can be anywhere in the city.
No. If it's in the DDA area, you have to get permission from the DDA to capture the local taxes, because they're already capturing them for what they're using them in your DDA. But generally, for a nice project in the downtown area that's in the DDA, they usually agree to lay off those taxes until the brownfield plan is over, and then they start collecting their local taxes on that property later. They could say no, though, too. And the state will, for their TIF, for the state TIF, they will not contribute state TIF unless you get local TIF in the project. So if your DDA said no, the state would say no, and then you would have zero TIF to work with. They want to see local involvement as part of the project, and they consider TIF the local involvement. All right, so this site here, this is now DCC. Okay, DCC has an assessment grant. It started at $600,000. We're almost out. We're going to go for another one in the fall with EPA, but we had $600,000. We're down to $5,000. We are revolving loan fund. We have given out over $17 million since 1998. And some of that has been given out more than once. It's been loaned and gotten back and loaned a second time. And last week, we just got another $3 million. We got one of the highest grants in the nation. There was 10 of them for $3 million given out. We were one of them. And so now we have, with that $3 million, we've got $3.5 million left in that RLF. And incidentally, when we put the application in, the Sears project, your site, was listed as one of the sites we wanted to tap into that $3 million for. So this was the site we were looking towards to helping out on. So, just so you know.
Is there a time limit on that?
Yeah, it's a 3-year grant, or excuse me, it's a 5-year grant, okay? We're also getting money back in all the time. We've given out loans. We just, I think our first 12 first 15-year loan just finished a couple of months ago. That's the first one that's gone all the way through for 15 years where they were paying back every month, and we've gotten that paid back. So there's a wide variety of different communities in the loans that are being paid back. So our assessment grant, we do phase 1s, phase 2s, baseline environmental assessments, which is the document that gives the developer liability protection when they buy a property. We do asbestos and hazardous materials assessments, due care analysis, and cleanup planning. Those are all part of the assessment grant. Now, the interesting thing is the EPA has evolved, and those same things I can cover under the RLF. So when the assessment grant, I'm only down to $5,000. When I'm out of that, I can still do assessment funds, but now it's going to be done under the RLF. So they give me more flexibility. So, but when you go for an RLF loan or a grant, it's a little more rigorous. We look at the financials, we look at pre-cleanup document preparation, and there's a public meeting that's involved. You have to have work plan approval by the agency. You have to do some design data acquisition. We have to see all that data. We have to see the cleanup design. We can also help with cleanup implementation, doing third-party oversight to make sure that the contractors are doing what they're supposed to do. We can do assessments, and we can do brownfield planning. So we have a wide range of things we can do under the RLF, and there's money there. And for assessment money, you're talking about a 1-month process. So the way it's worked in the past is that Carl would put together a form with the developer. They would come to our Brownfield Authority or Brownfield Consortium on our monthly meeting. We would review the project. We'd ask the developer or the community to describe the project. We would then we would approve the project after we scored it, and it meets our minimum scoring. And then it goes through a few different things where you have to get an eligibility determination by EPA or EGLE. The consultant would put together a work order that I would approve because I need to know what they're going to do with that money. Then there's a sampling and analysis plan that they would give me, and then the work is completed and invoiced for reimbursement. So there's a process there, and that's why I said it takes, when the developer gets into this program, it's a little bit of time. And then for the RLF, it takes another 2 to 4 months.
Can I ask you a question
Sure.
real quick? So the actual loan, that would be the developer taking that out, right?
It could be either the developer or, well, whoever owns the property. So if Lincoln Park had a property they owned, they would be the developer, so to speak. So we go through the same process with Lincoln Park, but the developer generally goes for the loan.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, has the developer in this project met with you?
No. No. I know that, I've seen the Phase 2 report for the subsurface report. I know that they have eligible activities, but I haven't had any dialogue with anybody. And even Carl. Carl sent me the information, but I don't know where the brownfield plan stands and that sort of thing. I'm sure they were putting one together, but trying to put one together, my assumption.
If they split that now and sell that and a hotel place takes over on that, that's a different scenario. They got to start all over?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the scenario. It's
Okay.
already been done.
Okay.
So,
Well, then you might have 2 people that would come to you for separate brownfield plans.
right, which is kind of what we're looking at, because the majority of the Sears building is gonna be under where the hotel's gonna be.
Okay.
Excuse me, Bob, you might want to step up to the mic when you talk so the people in the audience can hear.
Sorry.
Maybe say who you are and ask your question again if you don't mind. So the developer, what was the question?
I'm Bob Rizzo. I'm the assessor. And now that the property's been split, and the hotel is going to be sitting generally over top of where the building is now, so they'll have to have their own plan in order to talk to us, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then
Thank you.
That's, yep, sorry.
No, you're fine. Thank you.
And also, I would guess if that's gonna be majority where the building is, that's probably where any contamination is. If stuff is going on the rest of the property, they might not even do a brownfield plan because there may not be enough contamination for them to even be worth their while. So. you
Who
may still end up
assesses
with-
that?
Pardon me?
Who will assess that and determine that?
They and their consultant will decide whether it's even worth bringing a brownfield plan, because they're gonna, what they have to do is in that brownfield plan, they have to determine all the eligible activities and the costs and how much it would, how long it would take for them to get reimbursed over time to decide whether it'd be worth it to their while. I mean, if there's only, let's say, $25,000 worth of contamination, they're gonna pay more for the brownfield plan than they are to just
Okay.
deal with it.
Oh, good.
So, chances are, the way your scenario talks is you're probably just gonna get one that's for the building. You know, the hotel would come to you with all the data from below the building, and but they'll have to do their own phase one, separate from what the existing owner does, and they'll have to do a baseline environmental assessment to protect themselves from liability too. Because if they just buy that property and don't do that BEA, then they become liable for what's there. That's their protection. So they're gonna go through the same process that the existing developer has kind of gone through already. Because they have to protect themselves. They can't just theoretically, they could buy the phase one and phase two from the existing developer if they believe that that data is sufficient, and they would run with that data. But most people will do their own investigation to verify that it's not worse than the first developer is saying it is.
Thank you.
Continue, feel free.
Okay, so this is the, let's see, let's go. This is the process for getting RLF money. It's a little more encumbering. It takes 2 to 4 months, okay? So if you wanted to come to me, or the developer wanted to come to me and get a loan, it's going to take a little time. And we'll tell them up front. They do an application form. It's got 2 parts. It gives a lot of the financial information, so we kind of get a sense of whether this is a pie-in-the-sky developer. I've had a couple of those. Or this is a viable developer that really knows what they're doing. We score that project. I'm the one that does the scoring, and then we have we do a board approval for that at the monthly meeting. And then we use similar things like we did for the assessment grant. There's an eligibility determination. The eligibility determination by EPA and EGLE is to determine that this is not a site that's been dealt with before. Like if EGLE spent $3 million cleaning up a site before, they're not going to give you more money on this site. Now, we haven't had any of those yet, but that's what the purpose of the eligibility determination is. Then we put together the loan and subgrant documents with our attorney. That usually takes about a month. The environmental consultant then for the developer gives me a work order, which I then have to approve. Make sure it's consistent with what they're doing on the property. Then there's some pre-cleanup documents that have to be approved by EPA, and one of them is there's got to be a public meeting involved in there. And work completed and invoice for reimbursement from DCC. We follow the cleanup process as part of the RLF. Davis-Bacon is involved, wage rates, so they have to prove that they're paying Davis-Bacon wages. They have to prove that they're following their work plan, that they're not going off and asking for money for something that wasn't approved in the work plan. That's up to our environmental consultants. We have 4 environmental consultants that we choose from to follow a project, and they're kind of the third-party oversight to make sure the developer and their team is doing what they're supposed to be doing. So there's some checks and balances there. And these are just other things that you can do on properties, and this is really what I have Ann Jamison talk about. If you're interested in doing other types of incentives other than brownfield incentives, or in addition to brownfield incentives, some of these things, they're up, say up to 12 years, up to 10 years. Because the brownfield plan can go up to 30 years, you can layer these. So for instance, if you have an obsolete property, rehabilitation tax attached to a property that's for 12 years, after 12 years, the brownfield plan then can kick in. So you pay, you work through, there's probably no taxes exchanged on some of these incentives. Everything's kind of tax-free on some of these, and then after 12 years, then they start paying taxes and get paid for brownfield eligible activities after 12 years. So in essence, things start after 12 years instead of at time zero when a project is done. So you can layer these things, and if you want to get into those things, I'll have Ann come sometime and talk to you about these. She uses these all the time. So you got, some of these are, like we're in E-course, we're using PA 198 industrial property tax abatement, where all the taxes are abated for 12 years, so we can't do anything with brownfield. And also, you can evaluate whether that industrial property tax abatement is good or whether brownfield would be better. So there's those kinds of questions that you ask on some projects, depending on the project. One might be better than another for the community. Maybe not for the developer, but for the community. Then there's EAGLE funding incentives. EAGLE can do similar things that we do with our EPA money. They can do assessments, they can do cleanups, they can do grants and loans, and on some of our sites, we work together. There's both Michigan EAGLE grants and loans and also DCC EPA grants and loans, so they can be combined. And this discusses some of the details of those EAGLE grants and loans, which we can cover at another time, I think. Generally, EAGLE takes a little bit longer than us. Like, we can kick in our money faster than EAGLE can. EAGLE has a few more hoops that they have to go through internally. So sometimes we'll start in with our money, and then after our money is used up, then EAGLE might kick in their money. So sometimes it's a timing type of thing. So if you went to EAGLE and say, we want to do something on the Sears site, you might start with us and then go to them if there's a timing issue. But sometimes they'll give a grant and we can only give a loan. So you gotta kind of weigh your options there.
Does that conclude your report? It was very extensive.
Yeah, yes.
Before we go to council for questions one more time, anyone else from the audience want to have any questions? Please stick up to the microphone, though, please, so the audience can hear you at home. Announce your name, too.
Brandon, DDA. Did you say it was 15 years if a property's been sitting where they're no longer eligible for the brownfield?
No, it's a
Talk to the
30-year
mic,
brown,
please.
the property can be sitting for any number of years. It
Okay.
doesn't matter how long it's sitting. A brownfield plan will only last 30 years
Right.
though. So if you do a brownfield plan, it's approved, and then it sits for 15 years, well then, you can only pay back for the next
Okay.
15 years. So you've given up your 15 of your 30 years.
All right, got it.
Unless you could approve, or you can amend the brownfield plan and start over, but there's a lot of hoops that have to go with that then.
That makes sense.
Good question. Lisa, anything? Question? You have any questions? Bob, last call, any chance?
I'll give them a call and decide.
Carlos? Questions?
Wednesday is your,
Oh, good, thanks.
the DCC?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, at 9 AM. Yep. Are you going to be
I'll be
the
on Zoom,
Carl's?
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Anyone else from council have any questions? James? Any-
Well, so to kind of prime the pumps a little, so kind of where we're at right now, of course, things have gotten complicated because of the property split. But prior to that, the developer had done their assessments, put together a brownfield plan that they presented to our local brownfield authority, who approved it, sent it on to council. Council then held the public hearing. That's currently where that's sat. That brownfield plan called for the TIF reimbursement, as we were discussing kind of at length, which was good. Thank you for that, John. And the nice thing about the TIF is that we do have control, right? We've got control over some of the project, what we're going to approve, the period, the length of time it gets repaid. We've got some control over how much we approve. So that's really good. It gives us a good arm to work with the developer. Also, with the TIF as we were just talking about, if it's a 30-year reimbursement, they're going to want to get the reimbursement going as quickly as possible. It's an incentive for them to get the project moving. Because again, if it sits for 15 years and they only get it done after the 15 years, they're only getting reimbursed for those second 15 years unless we extend it.
We don't have to do it.
And we don't. Right. No, I'm just throwing out information right now. No, I'm not, and I'm not advocating anything. I am just simply here to provide some information and kind of push you guys into what are you guys going to need to be able to make a decision? Because the first decision point we kind of have is this site a site we want to entertain the idea of a brownfield? Are we interested in pursuing it? Because if so, what more information are we going to want? Of course, we're going to have to sit down with the developer, the new property owner, to try and work some of this out. But there are some broader things we're going to need. We're going to need, what kind of projects are you guys interested in? What kind of development? And then we can start getting into some of the more nitty gritty, bringing on outside counsel to help us to navigate through the redevelopment or the payment plan and the repayment agreement and all of that, because there are attorneys who do this. It's a very specialized field, but
James,
yeah.
will the original plan now have to be amended that the parcel has been split?
I believe so. It's going to not only have to be amended, but there's going to have to be two new plans, essentially, one for each parcel.
So essentially, the plan that was brought to us that we had the public hearing for is essentially null and void going.
Yeah, we're going to have to, I think we're going to be starting from dot here.
And then I think that if that new developer is encompassing most of the part of the property that was, where environmental assessment work was done, it's probably going to look pretty much the same. It's not going to look that much different, but there will be different entities that have to be listed in the brownfield plan. But as far as the activities, the eligible activities, and probably the environmental things that they're asking for are probably not going to be much different.
And I'm asking tonight, what information do you guys want? When I go back and I sit with the developers and their environmental team, what do you want me to be able to get from them and bring back to you?
We'll try to assess their financial backing, which is the big point that he was talking about.
Okay.
They would go to you before they would come to anybody here, correct?
Not if they're not going after DCC money, because right now, the current plan wasn't going after any additional state money, any additional EPA money, any additional money outside of the local brownfield TIF.
I think we should.
Which was kind of nice because it allows them to move quickly, potentially. It also puts most of the risk on them, as long as we do things right. It puts less risk on us because they're only collecting on the increment after the development. They don't collect any money if their development falls through. But without asking to go for DCC money, they won't go to the Brownfield group.
And as an FYI, the next EDC Brownfield Commission meeting is tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock right here.
Right. Yeah, it won't happen before then.
I think we should ask them, though, to look into other incentives.
Give us an idea of a timeline of when they,
A presentation of their plans?
also, when we had the study session here, we got very little information on what was going to happen there, but we got a lot of information on the company and the family and that. So I'd like to know what kind of retail they're planning besides a hotel, or because I don't think anybody here wants to see more dollar stores or that kind of thing. I think we want to see restaurants and stores that we can visit and not have to go to other towns to do something that we don't have now, basically is what we would like to see filled there.
And I'd like to know what commitments they already have. We know that they have a commitment for the hotel, but we don't know of any other commitment. And honestly, I do want to know what they're going after, because a car wash is certainly not something that I'm interested in seeing there.
And if the hotel's going up against Southfield, where would the car wash go then? Because originally they were talking about putting that up by Southfield. So they were worried about the runoff during cruise.
Yeah, the hotel itself is set back quite a bit. It would be towards the northwest end of the property, right, Bob? Yep.
It's, the back end of Sears is kind of part of the hotel. So it's pushed all the way back there.
So it's gonna be over the drain.
I'm not gonna say a word.
Okay.
That's the
All
other
right.
thing is if they do the Brownfield, can money from that be used to move that drain if it needs to be moved?
Boy,
That's big money.
Yeah.
and that's
MEDC would have to be
Yeah,
involved then.
that's getting into some of the other state
Because that's a
funds.
non-environmental eligible activity.
Right.
Okay.
and that's a big drain.
Yeah, I know.
128 inches, that's a big drain.
Any other questions from council, Lillian?
Yes, please, just a comment, though, actually. One thing that I would like for them to know is that we're looking to raise the bar. We don't want, like Maureen said, we don't want another dollar store or,
Cash checking? Check.
yes, not your average strip mall thing that, you're used to seeing. We want something a little better. Maybe a lot better. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Well, is there any other information that would help for you guys, at least at this point of the process? Whether we want to.
Hear more of their plan and their vision
Right.
than about who they are.
So, yeah, because what we can do is kind of help them prepare an actual presentation that we can come back. It pretty much is another study session, maybe ahead of a regular meeting, so that we can let them present their actual timeline, what their vision for the site truly is. Because hopefully by now they can really, with the information, they'll be able to turn that around, and
Are we talking with the original developers or? the new-
it'll probably have to be both.
Okay.
Truly, and then, and here comes the thing, if with the split, most of the contamination, most of the issue falls on the hotel site, there's very little outside of functionally obsolete definition that would cover the rest of it, and so there would be less control overall for the project if they're not going to look to do a brownfield for the rest of it. Then essentially, they could do whatever is zoned by right there. If they're not asking for any help from us, if it's something that's legally allowed to be there, they can develop it.
Which could be a dollar store.
Which
or
could be
car wash.
could be a dollar store or a car wash, or probably a drive-through restaurant, fast food, that type of stuff. So if they are pursuing a brownfield, it is better for us, because we do have more ability to have say in what the project is.
Do you know the reason that they wanted to split it?
I don't. That's not a question I've asked. When I first started meeting with them, they were very much telling me about how they wanted to be not just buy it, develop it, sell it. They wanted to be buy it, develop it, own it. So it is a little shocking when they came back and said that they had sold the property that was going to be the hotel. But
So if already they're changing their story, that gives me some concern.
Time will tell. Any other discussion?
Can I ask Do you think that it would be better to look into obtaining the legal counsel before you go much farther so that he can sit in on your meetings with the developer to make sure that what they're doing falls in with what's legal and according to plan? I'm just,
If that's,
We have to hire an attorney, that's what you're saying.
yeah, and we'd,
I mean, if
Yeah, we could-
we're going to hire one anyway to
Right.
do whatever to protect our interests, don't you think he should be sitting in on these chats at the beginning?
Day one, yeah.
Yeah,
you say he
Because
would
Appointments
be,
clerk.
yeah, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Adana,
never
because, when the developer stood there at the podium and was talking to us, he didn't give us much information at all. And so it truly concerned us. And that's why I don't think any of us here have ever sat through a brownfield development before. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
For
So-
teaching us things and,
and on the attorney thing, I do want to just point out that it's most likely going to be something where, and again, it is a professional service, so typically the same bidding requirements aren't there, but it is likely going to be somebody that we have sought, either from recommendations or anything like that, and there won't be, we will have sought them because of what they do.
right.
And because this is so specialized, an acquaintance of mine is in a rather large law firm in the area. They don't have anybody who does it anymore. So it is
They're
we are
very
going
specialized.
very specialized.
And we
And-
need that because, this is all new to us, so we need that.
And that's why we asked him for.
That was exactly,
Yeah.
recommendation.
yep. So,
And we
One
want to
thing
make
I-
sure
one
we do
thing I
it
would-
right.
Just a question I would ask too is ask the new developer if they've ever done a brownfield before. That'll give you a clue of, what they're up against. If they've done something on a contaminated property, chances are they've been through some of the hoops already.
All righty, anybody else? Last call. Last question. Thanks again, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, we don't need a motion to adjourn, right?
Don't, but
So there being no further discussion, the study session will adjourn at 7:10.
okey-doke.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up.
Thank you.
Thank you.